Welcome to another episode of Science Horror. This week's story is about the invention of a disturbing machine back in the 1920s. I've been advised by my almost preternaturally skilled team of legal experts to say that all our stories are fictional and written by myself. It's just easier that way from a legal standpoint. When my grandfather was on his deathbed, he recounted a curious story to me, which I shall share with you here exactly as he told it to me. In the 1920s, many people were attempting to find a way to transmit images via the radio waves that Hertz had experimentally demonstrated scarcely more than 30 years earlier. The first advertised public radio broadcast, or wireless as we called it in those days, had occurred only in 1920. My friend Archie was a keen amateur scientist, and he became completely obsessed with the problem. His family owned a barn out on Morsley Hill, where he performed his experiments, and in the early 20s he was there most of the time. He had a small income from some property that he owned, and he made a little selling crystal wireless sets that he made himself, although by then the new valve wirelesses were starting to come in. You could sit and listen to those without needing an earpiece. Archie understood valves, but he kept all the ones he could find or buy for his experiments. I remember it was a Saturday morning and I was sitting drinking my tea in the cafe on Church Street when he suddenly burst in, all excited. "I think I've done it, Tom," he said. "You have to come and see at once." "What have you done exactly?" I said, putting down my newspaper. "I've successfully transmitted an image from a camera to a screen without using film or light," he said. Well, you can imagine I was rather impressed. Naturally, I wanted to see that for myself, so I went with him up to the barn the very moment I'd finished my tea. I hadn't seen the barn for at least 6 months, and I could hardly believe the appearance of it once he ushered me inside. There were valves, wires and chemicals literally everywhere. I had never seen so many valves in one place. The apparatus he wanted to show me sat on a table in the middle of the barn. He had a thing that looked like a camera facing towards the back of the barn, and at the other side of the table was a dark mirrored glass about the size of a man's head, held up by clamps of the type chemists use. Behind the screen was a collection of coils and wires and triodes and whatnot. At the back of the barn, where the camera faced, was a bust of the Emperor Hadrian from some amateur sculptor, I should think. "Watch the glass," he said. He pulled a lever and there was a huge crackling and a smell of ozone and a humming. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" I asked. "Wait for it," he said, and he joined me in standing and staring at the glass, apparently having finished adjusting his knobs and dials. At first the glass began to glow with a greenish hue. Then I began to see speckles and lines flashing across it. "The receiving device there will detect light from the back of the barn," he said, pointing at the camera. "It transmits an image as a series of superimposed waves back to this device here, and then we'll see exactly what the receiver sees." The dots and lines on the screen were indeed beginning to coalesce into something, but it was hard to say what. "I'm not really seeing anything," I told him. "All things come to he who waits," he said. And then, quite suddenly, an exact reproduction of Hadrian's head appeared on the screen. "Good heavens," I said. "That's quite something. How have you done it?" "We're not finished yet," he said. "Watch this, watch the screen." With that, he walked around and stood in front of the bust. I could see him there on the screen, entirely in hues of green, just as well as I could see him in actuality. "It's not done with mirrors and prisms?" I asked, "or film even?" "Not at all," he replied. "That's the thing, in between the camera and the screen, the image is transmitted in the form of electrical waves." "Remarkable," I said. "Hey, can we turn it around and see ourselves looking at it?" "Of course," he said. He rotated the camera entirely around so that it faced us, and there we were, depicted on the screen in green, looking like a pair of idiots no doubt, I with my mouth half open in surprise, and he in a state of high excitement. The barn laboratory behind us was also clearly visible down to every minute detail. It was almost like looking through a green-tinted window. I noticed that when Archie turned the camera around, he made some adjustments so that our figures fitted perfectly on the glass screen, similar to the adjustments one makes with a telescope in order to see things further away or closer to. That made me wonder whether the machine might also be used as a telescope or even a microscope. "What happens if you focus it on the back of the barn?" I asked. "I'll show you," he said. "The resolution is far better than any unaided human pair of eyes." He began to rotate the focus dial or whatever it was, but something caused the knob to stick. "Something's got stuck in there," he said, peering into a nest of metal plates. The knob looked to me to be attached to an electric condenser of the type used with wireless sets. He angled himself so that he could exert a little more force on the dial, and suddenly the thing gave way and twisted much further around than he had intended. The glass screen showed us a picture of the field outside the barn. I could see the woods at the edge and the spire of St. Stephen's off in the distance. "I say, what's happened?" I said. He said, "What do you mean?" And as he said it, he came around to look at the screen. The expression on his face was a wonder to behold. Anyone would have thought he'd seen a ghost or his old Labrador Scampy rising from the grave. On the screen, we could clearly see a picture of the outside of the barn. Somehow the device was looking straight through the back of the barn and showing us the field beyond it. "How is it doing that?" I said. "There must be a hole in the wall or something," he said after a stunned pause. We spent the next hour trying to track down some hole, however small, through which the machine could be seeing. There was no hole. Then Archie started examining the roof. He thought some kind of invisible rays from the sun could be reflecting off something on the roof and coming down through a hole somewhere, but that didn't really fit with what we were seeing on the screen in any case. What we saw on the screen was exactly what you would be able to see if a large section of the wall of the barn had been simply removed. "The camera must be detecting invisible rays somehow that can pass through wood," he said, finally. "You have to understand, it's not a normal camera." "You know, Archie," I said, "you might have made quite an important discovery here, more important even than wirelessly transmitting pictures." "You may be right," he said. "Look, I'm going to have to research this in depth. Why don't you leave me to it and come back next week? I ought to have some preliminary conclusions by then." I took myself off for a bit of a walk. My head was buzzing too much to do much else but walk. I'm no scientist, but it seemed to me that Archie had discovered something that would change the world in ways that were hard to even imagine. He must have discovered some new type of ray, I thought, similar to the rays of Röntgen or Hertz, except these rays must be absolutely everywhere. I wondered if these could be the longitudinal etheric vibrations that so many had sought and failed to detect. I didn't see or hear from Archie for several days after that. I was consumed with curiosity about how his research was going, but the last thing I wanted to do was distract him. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way up to the old barn one evening after work. I found Archie in a state of high excitement. He looked like he'd been sleeping in the barn and hadn't washed since the last time I saw him. "Tom," he said when I walked in, "come and look at this, it's amazing." I went over to the table where he had his apparatus set up. "What have you found?" I asked. "Tom, I can see everything, everywhere," he said wildly. "There's nothing the machine can't see through. Imagine the medical uses. Imagine the advantage we'll have in war. Come and look." I noticed the machine had a lot more controls than it had previously. There were knobs and dials and meters all over the place. The table itself had been augmented with packing cases, and there were more apparatus of various types sitting on the floor next to the cases. Archie twiddled several of the dials with enormous care, and presently an image of the field outside of the barn appeared on the screen. "We saw this last time," I said. I was eyeing Archie's appearance uneasily. He was so dishevelled that I feared his mind might have gone slightly awry, and he had forgotten the details of my last visit. "Watch," he said. Then he gradually twisted one of the dials, and I saw that the image on the screen was proceeding down the hill and towards the village. Eventually it reached the end of Frosling Road, and there Archie twisted another dial, and we executed a sharp turn and proceeded directly down the road towards the houses. "But this is marvellous," I said. "What kind of range does it have? Can we go anywhere in England?" "As to the range, I have no idea," said Archie. "I haven't found the end of it yet. I need to increase the size of some of the auxiliary coils, but that's not what I want to show you. You haven't seen the half of it yet." Archie pressed a button and slowly rotated a dial back towards himself with the utmost care. He reminded me of a brain surgeon performing an operation. The progress of our field of vision halted outside a house. Then he began to carefully manoeuvre a pair of small levers, and we turned towards the house and then seemed to pass through the wall of it, so that we ended up inside someone's kitchen. In the kitchen, a man and a woman were arguing silently. We could almost guess at some of their words from the motion of their lips, but we couldn't actually hear anything. "I can go anywhere and see anything I want," said Archie triumphantly, his eyes shining. "They have no idea we're observing them. Imagine what an aid this could be to the police." "But Archie, this is a monstrous invasion of privacy," I said. "You can't go into people's houses and watch them without their consent." "Why not?" said Archie. He seemed genuinely surprised. "Why not?" I said. "Would you want people watching you when you think you're in private?" "I wouldn't care," he said. "I've nothing to hide. When I publish the details of this device, no criminal will ever be able to hide from the police again. I will eliminate crime." "But no one will ever have any privacy again," I said. "The government will turn tyrannical in no time at all. Anyway, I don't want strangers watching me when I'm at home with my wife, nor when I'm taking a bath or performing my morning ablutions for that matter. Why, it's hideous. Turn it off immediately." Archie reached for a button, But then events on the screen arrested our attention. It appeared distinctly as though the man had struck the woman. She appeared to be nursing her cheek with one hand and with the other begging him to back off. "You see," said Archie, "this is exactly the sort of thing that might be prevented with this machine." I stared gawping at the wretched device for a few moments, then I said, "Turn it off, Archie, now." He flicked a switch and the image faded. I tried to compose my thoughts. To me, the matter was quite clear. The right to privacy must be held inviolable. Before I could say anything, he said, "Tom, it's not only crime that this machine can put an end to. Think of its medical uses. I believe with some adjustments I'll be able to zoom in on even the tiniest piece of matter with practically infinite resolution. We'll be able to see inside the human body in enormous detail. This machine will end all crime, and it will end nearly all disease as well." "That may well be," I said, "but imagine the power it will place in the hands of anyone who has one. You're a good man, Archie, but not everyone's as good as you. A tyrant with a device like this could rule the world in the space of a year, and I doubt it would even take that long. Once established, no one would ever be able to get rid of him. He'd uncover every plot against him before it had even got started. No, you can't tell anyone about this machine." He paused for thought, running his fingers through his hair unsteadily. "Well then, supposing I concede that you may be right," he said. "Why wouldn't I simply use the machine myself and put it to good ends?" "It'll corrupt you, Archie," I said. "Don't you see? The only sane thing to do is destroy it." He paced back and forth a few times, then said, "Let me think about it." As I walked home from the barn, all sorts of unsettling thoughts swirled about in my head. The truth is, I wasn't nearly so sure about the matter as I'd pretended to be. An end to all crime and disease, that had a certain appeal. On the other hand, how could tyranny be prevented? I wondered whether some sort of equilibrium might be maintained if we all possessed such a device. How would it look? A world with no privacy, no secrets, no surprises. The more I thought about it, the less appealing it got. It was impossible to foresee how such a machine would actually affect society, but it seemed to me unlikely that it would eliminate crime, even supposing we were all willing to pay the price of an end to privacy. After all, we can't all watch everyone else all the time. We would find ourselves in the situation of a primitive people who are all forced to live outdoors in full sight of each other. Crimes of all kind could be committed, as long as they were either sudden and impulsive, or appeared so, or else so long as one person convinced the others that the crime would be no crime at all. The next day I happened to walk past the house on Frosling Road, the one that Archie had observed with his device. I wondered whether Archie was watching me at the time. As I passed, the woman who lived there happened to emerge with some washing she wanted to hang on the line, and I noticed her cheek was horribly bruised. I wished her a cheery good morning as I passed. "Morning," she said, with a wry smile. "I say, that's a nasty bruise you've got, if you'll excuse me saying so," I said. Ours was a close-knit village, but I didn't know the woman personally, and I was sailing a bit close to impertinence, I'll admit. "Fell down the stairs," she said. "Happens to the best of us," I said. The day after that, I went back to check on Archie again. I needed to know if he had arrived at a decision or not. When I entered the old barn, I was horrified at his appearance. He was gazing into the machine and visibly jumped when I came in. Evidently, he had not seen me approaching. "Tom," he said, "I don't know where to begin. It's unspeakable. It's unfathomable. What is? I said. I've been watching people, Tom, he said. I've watched people all over the world. The whole world, Tom. You've no idea of the horrible things that go on, even in England. The bestial tortures, the inhumanity, the brutal destruction of all that is pure and sacred. I can't say I'm surprised at all, I said. People are beasts. But Archie, you can't take the world on your shoulders. Turn that infernal machine off. I can't, he said. I can't. Something has to be done. I just have to figure out what. His face was streaked with sweat or tears, or perhaps both. He hardly looked sane at all. You can't sort out the whole world, Archie, I said. Whatever you've seen, it's too much for one human mind. Look at you. You're becoming deranged. We need to turn it off immediately. You at least need a break from it. I strode towards the machine and started looking for cables that I could detach. I wanted to disable the thing temporarily and get a shot of spirits into him, before his mind completely lost its moorings. No, he shouted, with an energy and loudness that startled me. You don't understand. I'm in the middle of observing important events. People will die if you turn it off. You can't do anything but observe, I said, even if you could sort out all the problems in the world. You're wrong, said Archie, and a horrible smile crept over his face. I can and will intervene. I must. You have no idea of the horrible things that are going on. If I were to show you, you'd never be the same again. God has chosen me to be his avenging angel, Tom. That's the only thing that makes sense. This is destiny. I alone can stop the war and the suffering and the sickening, loathsome crimes of so-called humanity. I'm deactivating this machine, I said. You're not in your right mind. When did you last eat or sleep? I'm turning it off this instant and you're not going to stop me. I turned back towards the machine. I am going to stop you, he said, and he picked up a crowbar that was lying on top of one of the upturned packing cases. Archie, I said in surprise. You don't understand, he said. How could you? You've not seen what I've seen. I have to do certain things now, and I need time to figure it all out. I suggest you leave. I need more time. Dear God, the terrible things I've seen. You've no idea. I backed away slowly. Listen to me, I said. You've clearly not slept in a while. You're in a state of nervous exhaustion. You've seen terrible things, I understand, but... Get out, he roared suddenly, and swung the crowbar within an inch of my head. All right, I'm going, I said, and I strode out of the barn, feeling highly unsettled. Over the next week I slept badly, worked distractedly and ate little. The idea of Archie as the de facto emperor of planet Earth was going to take some getting used to. I couldn't see what would stop him accumulating more and more power as part of his efforts to fix everything. It didn't seem likely to me that he'd simply intervene in a few of the worst atrocities that he could find, nor that he wouldn't gradually accrue power until he attained dizzying levels of control. You have to understand that Archie would soon know everything. He would know all the machinations of kings and presidents, all the movements of the stock markets before they even happened, and every possible move that anyone planned against him. Another possibility seemed quite credible to me. That was that he would lose his mind altogether and eventually be found wandering the streets naked or gibbering helplessly on the floor of his barn. It eventually struck me that a small band of men could have simply run in and destroyed his machine before he could have put it to further use. He might have seen them coming, but he would have been powerless to stop them. By the time I thought of this, another week had already passed, and I had no doubt that by then he would have taken steps to ensure that couldn't happen. Or would he? I didn't have a band of men to hand, but I started to think that perhaps I ought to grab something heavy, run in there, and smash his machine myself, fighting him off if necessary. At that point I began to wonder if I hadn't become a little unhinged myself. Perhaps I was blowing the whole thing out of proportion. Probably Archie just needed a little time to think things over. And then the man in the house on Frosling Road was murdered. He was found beaten to death. I knew it had to be Archie's doing. I only wondered whether Archie himself had done it, or had he, by now, recruited others into his schemes. The murder made up my mind. I had to go and see what was happening up in that barn. I had a double-barrelled shotgun in my attic, and I resolved to put on boots and a coat, fetch the gun, and run up there as fast as I could, hoping to take him by surprise. I'd blast that machine to pieces if I could manage it. The barn seemed suspiciously quiet when I arrived. I listened outside for a minute and couldn't hear anything. I figured there were even odds that Archie or some minion of his was waiting for me on the other side with a gun or a crowbar, but I'd have to take that chance. Finally, I pushed the door open. Inside was Archie, propped against a crate, drunk as a lord. "I've destroyed it," he said. "You can put the gun down." "Why?" I said. "Because you were right. It's too much for one human mind to handle, and I could never trust anyone else with it either. The depravity, Tom, the hideous, vile depravity, the scale of it, the depths of it. But most people are all right. Most people aren't a party to it. Not really. There's that." "Did you murder the man on Frosling Road?" I said. "Actually no," said Archie. "His wife's brother bashed his head in with a lead pipe. I'm not sorry. What you saw was a tiny fraction of it. The man was a monster. Even so, his wife cried over his corpse. Can you understand it?" Not long after that, Archie went off to Switzerland to recover. I never saw him again. I've often wondered what happened to him. After all, he'd destroyed his machine, but he knew how to make another one if he ever saw fit to do so. When the Second World War happened, I figured Archie must have died. Would anyone who knew how to build such a machine have refrained from using it as the world dissolved into chaos and murder for the second time in the 20th century? Or was it simply that he had seen things so horrific and yet come to terms with them so thoroughly that not even a war could shake his determination to leave the machine alone? All of this seems so long ago to me now that sometimes I wonder if it was a horrible dream. One thing gives me comfort. A man like Archie could witness unspeakable horrors and yet in the end remain good old Archie. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please reconstruct the machine from the description given here, use it to become dictator of the world, and put this channel on the front page of YouTube. Thank you. Also, if you would consider subscribing, that would be very kind of you. My name's John, and this has been the Science Horror Podcast, or Videocast. New episode every Monday.